Good morning, Trumptopia. Welcome back to a special segment of the almost daily Zencast, Late Night Thoughts, with the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. On today's special segment, we ponder the question, what if there is no apocalypse? Good morning, friends and listeners. Good morning, Trumptopia. Good morning, world. I'm your host, the incorrigible Mr. Zappo. It is Sunday, March 29th. I shoulda, coulda, woulda recorded this last night, but I was too effing lazy, so I didn't. But here we are this morning. We're going to talk about my late night thoughts. Most people, I think, I certainly have, I qualify as most people in this condition or this situation. Most people have pondered at some point or another in their life, is this right now the end of the world? Is this what we're going through? Are we living through the end of the actual world, the actual end of the world as we know it? And in all honesty, it's a fair and valid question to ask, right? I guess it could also be dismissed as an irrational and silly question to ask. But I have never yet, until last night, I think, ever pondered, what if there just isn't ever going to be an end of the world? Bunny ear quotes. Air quotes, right? What if it's something we're obsessed with? What if it's an idea that we are fixated on that has no... Oh, what's the word? There's a phrase for that. That has just no bearing on the organic nature of reality. As I sit here and drink my morning tea, I'm limiting my coffee intake because, caffeine is one of those beautiful legal drugs that'll just tear you up inside if you let it. I drink too much coffee. I drink coffee the way Fry drinks coffee in that one episode of Futurama where he drinks too much coffee, if you know what I'm talking about. So, here we are. It's Sunday morning. A lot of people in the world are going to some church, some temple, some room in which they will, or, virtually nowadays. We are on global lockdown. But people are honoring, revering some tradition or another. There are many to choose from. On this day of rest. And everyone's doing it in different ways, but of that myriad of customs and traditions and schools of thought on the matter, the vast majority of them express some conceptualization of an imminent, incoming, soon to occur end of the world. if we limit our discussion temporarily purely to the bandwidth of Christianity and some of its thinking over the last 2,000 some odd years, 3,000 years or so, depending on whether or not we accept the Gregorian calendar is technically accurate, or whether we look into if it's, 100 or 1,000 or so years off. Which is a subject for a future episode, I suppose. But if we limit our point of view just to that Christian world of thought, we have to first of all acknowledge how many different variations, and self-declared better than everybody else's interpretations of the Christian narrative or the Christian ideological construct, the quote-unquote Christian religion, there really are. There's too many of them, right? I don't mean that too judgmentally, but there are. There's so many of them, it's a bit odd. In theory, they all center around Yeshua Christos, or the Christ, but we can get into some pretty serious debate as we look at the different flavors and the different interpretations of how Christ is presented. And similarly, get into a pretty interesting rabbit hole of discussion into what the apocalypse really is, and what, if any, future event is actually being forewarned or prophesized. Given that, and given that also, given all the things I just said, and on top of that, also, the simple proposition, I don't want to call it a fact, but the statement that it is entirely likely that organized religions et al., insert your favorite one here, has probably been on multiple levels in various ways infiltrated by different kinds of corruption over the many years of the development of each tradition. There's evidence for it littered about everywhere. And thus, if you were to take a massive survey about what people who believe in an apocalypse, what they think the word really means, you'll get an interesting array of various interpretations, many of which will exclude my favorite component. My favorite ingredient or aspect or meaning or way of understanding the word apocalypse is the ancient Greek, which, tragically, to many contemporary minds, seems to be either a footnote not worth investigating, or something to shoo people away from, or something that people are just not aware of. In ancient Greek, the word apocalypse has the meaning of revelation, right? That's why the book of Revelations is the book of the apocalypse. Now, the very idea of and the phrasing for the book of Revelations has got a lot of baggage, and most of it has got to do with this either accidental or intentional association with the other definitions of apocalypse, right? There's plenty of definitions of apocalypse. Some of the most common are, in general terms, the complete and final destruction of the world, as described in the biblical book of Revelation. More generically, we use that as like an event involving the destruction or damage at an awesome or catastrophic scale of something or some system. Like we had, we had a stock market apocalypse, or we had In Los Angeles, we infamously had a car apocalypse, or carpocalypse, when we shut down huge chunks of major arterial freeway routes that really just screwed a bunch of people over. But I digress. As fun as those fun tidbits are, there's obviously a huge genre of literature, both contemporary and not so contemporary, as in reaching back throughout the epochs, especially post Judeo-Christian culture establishing itself as a sort of global norm. We can get into all kinds of pockets of important writers that could be considered prophets, right? From various schools, ranging from the Hasidic to the medieval Kabbalistic to the Cordovian Kabbalah tradition, etc., etc., etc. There's all kinds of, there's Gnostic Christian esotericism. There's, post American Christian apocalyptic writings, which are technically apocrypha. 2 words, shouldn't be confused. Go get a dictionary. It's always interesting, by the way, if you are exploring the world or the sort of the platform of world religious writings. Do not make the mistake of neglecting each tradition's collection of apocrypha, books that were at some point part of the development of said different traditions, but at some later point removed from the mainstream, and or marginalized or vilified, especially. There's a whole interesting world of Christian apocrypha, etc., etc. Very much worth looking into. There's a whole set of Gospels that if you surveyed your average, run-of-the-mill, right off the streets, 200, 2,000 everyday Joe Schmo Christians who go kind of part-time to church, they probably have never heard of them, right? In that random array of people, a certain percentage will have heard of them and have a negative opinion, and an even probably smaller percentage of people will have heard of them and have an inclusive opinion of them, acknowledging that it's a difficult subject matter because so many people are either entirely unaware or, unfortunately, turned against them mentally without ever having actually explored them intellectually. But I digress. Revelation, and this is interesting here, so let's make sure we really take a moment to savor these words, right? This is ancient Greek understanding of apocalypse, an unveiling or unfolding of things not previously known and which could not be known apart from the unveiling. Now that is a completely different understanding of the word apocalypse. And it may be, perhaps, why in our own contemporary modern lifetimes, just say the last 60 years to round up, right? To be very inclusive. Hell, let's just take the last 100 years. How many prophesized, proclaimed, advertised, warned about, fear-mongered over, anticipated, prepped for, and then failed to occur ends of the world have there been? More than probably, us average Joe Schmoes who don't go looking into these sorts of things would care to realize. In my own lifetime, and I'm only in my mid-40s, in my own lifetime, I'm sure that I've survived more than a dozen or more, right? That have just rolled by and been forgotten. so-and-so from such and such church has somehow miraculously decoded some mysterious passages in the Bible and decreed authoritatively that this year, next year, the fall, whatever year, on such and such date, based because of this, and that in the Bible, it's going to be the apocalypse, the assumption, the what's that other fun word? Not euphoric, but the where all the good people, the chosen ones, whoever they may or may not be, get delivered on high, and that all the dead that came before us that are good and did the right righteous things and believed in the right righteous things will be exhumed and reanimated, rematerialized in their brightest, fullest, most vital form, and then all incorporeal be assumed, the assumption. Yes, that's that other fancy word. They would be assumed up into heaven, right? There's a couple of different terms for that, and that's supposed to happen right along with, either at the beginning of or at the end of the apocalypse. There's various interpretations, and it also depends on whether or not you include the concept of whether there shall or shall not be 1,000 years of war, just between humanity first. And or you interpret that as 1,000 years of war between actual demons and angels around us, in which we may participate as superior human beings, having already been assumed or left behind to be enslaved by the demons, right? Like, there's variations. But I digress. In our lifetimes, we have survived many a proclaimed special moment that this whole collection of potential events is going to happen on X date. And every time, now sometimes these are random, out of the blue, right? And then also every time that there is an emergency, that there is a global catastrophe, that there's, when there have been great wars, when there have been great climactic disasters, catastrophic climate disasters, and when, as in the present moment, dear friends, there has been some wild, relatively new disease threatening our understanding and our daily practice and our goings-on, we start to question. We start to ask this fear-based question. What if now, this time, it really is, for reals, in a dark and scary way, the end of the world? But how many of us, dear friends, how many of us ask, what if there's never really going to be an end of the world? What if the truest meaning of the word apocalypse is a revelation through unveiling and unfolding of events and things not previously known or knowable, and which can only be known through the manifest unveiling, through the events of history? What if, like that one picture, which I'm using as a background, I think for future memes, because I don't think I've posted it yet. I've posted the picture, which I found somewhere. And forgive me, I don't have a photo credit. I wish I did. Sorry for technically being in violation of image copyright law, but it's the internet, and 98% of people are. So don't sue me. Help me find who the photo artist was to credit it. But there's this beautiful, enigmatic, very haunting picture that I've seen floating around before, very seldomly. It's like not super overly used, I don't think. And it might be one of those. It's used in the back as a background in one of those sort of like royalty rights stock footage type apps or whatever. But I don't know. But it's a rickety, scary ass looking footbridge spanning some relatively large chasm, some sort of, canyon, some sort of bridge over a gorge, right, in some exotic land. And there is such dense, thick fog what looks like a mere 4 or 5 feet away, that everything, including the bridge itself, completely disappears from view and it's just a wall of fog. The future present moment can be arguably said to always exist like that. In other words, regardless of which model of time cosmology you think you believe in, right? Whether you think you believe, and I say that because we choose to believe in things and we think we really, really believe in them, but we also sometimes discredit that which our deeper understandings know, because our mind and our body and our spirits have deeper levels to them than we usually shine the light of surface consciousness on, right? It's not the modality we're usually functioning in. So I digress. We think we believe in things like, oh, time is a river, or time is a block in which new slivers are added, or time is something that exists simultaneously in present, past, and future, but we can only perceive this present moment now for whatever mysterious rules that our bodies are following. Whichever version, there's several. Look it up. That's a really great rabbit hole to get lost in, to try to decide for yourself. Give me all the philosophical, logical, and scientific theories or models about what time is and how it functions, and then go, I'm going to look at all of them for myself and decide. Try that. It's fun. Regardless of which one you land on or which one you think you are currently attached to, the future, from my perspective, is mysteriously always like that image of that bridge. It's always something that we can speculate on, make models about, and almost sort of feel like we might have some intuitive future memory of, some inner connection to, like an understanding that the bridge must be sound enough if, for example, we know that there's someone on the other side that's called back, and but we can't see them. There's this mysterious way in which intuition and the future can somehow seem to interact. But in terms of our everyday, mundane, general sort of run-of-the-mill phenomenological experience, I think that we could all probably agree that the future in absolute reality, in stark, harsh, cold light of, this isn't my imagination, this isn't my anticipation, this isn't my plan, my projection, my manifestation, this is what I actually tangibly can perceive. We can see 3, 4, 5 feet ahead of us in a meaningful way. And then there is an impenetrable boundary through which we know we must transpire. We must transect, is that a word? We must transact the transaction of cutting through that boundary. We must move forward, right? We know the weirdest part is that no matter what model of the universe or of time you choose to subscribe to add your belief to, we cannot go back no matter what we do. And that's a weird, epic, undeniable thing that even if we attempt to stand perfectly still, and so I digress. What if we pondered this other question? Acknowledging that the future is, despite all prophecy, despite all prediction, despite all analytical analysis and modeling that might be available to us, it is unknowable, like the conditions at the other end of that bridge that cuts through the fog, other than that it must be traversed, and that it theoretically can be, right? Because it appears to be intact. It appears to continue to be intact, especially if we watch or perceive others move boldly into that future, cross that path and transcend the boundary. As I think there's enough room in the way in which life works that we kind of can, and people can be in a place that appears beyond our reach, even though we can physically see them, even if we can be physically in the same room. I'm talking about this is as a metaphor or allegory to this multidimensional phenomena that is moving forward into the future. And if the world is, so we come back to this question of ending. If the future seems to be emerging from this impenetrable boundary and or unfolding before us literally, it's because as we move forward, here's the fun, weird thing about fog. I mean, although it that photo, theoretically, you're standing outside of like a cloud column, outside of a column of fog. But once you walk into it, your perception's even more limited, but you adjust and you are able to perceive some amount of movement ahead of you and some amount backwards to a certain degree. But you cannot turn around. Once you choose to start moving forward to get to that other side of that gorge, that canyon, that trench, that gaping maw, you can't go back, because as the fog closes in behind you, it's as if all of that ceases to be accessible. Like that wall of fog is impenetrable physically. The future is impenetrable visually and to some degree mentally. We can make our best guess, our educated, informed guess, but we cannot know it. We cannot perceive it. We can only mentally anticipate it and adjust as we go. But the path is just cut off. So what if, because of that, there never is an end? Right? To get back to this original question, how do we cope with the challenges that will emerge from this impenetrable, but not impenetrable fog before us, if we know that there is no real end besides, of course, death, right? Ooh, which reminds me, I'd forgotten. I randomly received, I think in my mind, some inspiration, whatever that means, right? We can get into a discussion about that. We should do an episode, if I haven't already gone off on a really deep sidebar in some other episode, about where inspiration, quote unquote, comes from. Because that's one of those deeper, like, it's hard enough to ponder, it's challenging enough to ponder, where do I emerge from? Where does me originate from? Of course, you can say, my mother's womb, but then you get to the, egg chicken question. But in terms of phenomena, you're here, you're present, you're now, you're standing on the precipice, and you're about to cross that bridge, moving forward into the future. Realistically, though, our lives, if we want to fully utilize this bridge analogy, our lives begin at birth, right? So the bridge, we stepped off the bridge at birth. I think sometimes we catch ourselves standing really, really, really still, and we might have fooled ourselves into thinking that we're standing on solid ground, at the entrance to the bridge, at the beginning of the bridge. But technically, we step off the bridge the moment we're born. And we are constantly stumbling forward through this rickety, scary, frightening bridge. I wish I'd picked this image for the cover today. I've got a meme on deck that'll be posted soon, so you'll know what I'm talking about. And it says, the future, what does it say? Where do I have it? Where can I look it up? I have it on this device, which is actually turned off because I wanted to give it a break. All right, I'll see if I remember to look at that later. I made a meme though recently, and it reads something along the lines of, "The unknown future always looks this scary." I think, and this is come into my mind as a sort of not answer, a response, but not an answer to the question, what if there is no end? The only real end, arguably, philosophically, ontologically, cosmologically, and matter-of-factually, the only real end is the moment that this body expires. That the body we are in says, "That's enough, thanks, bye." And even that, according to many, especially from ye olde ancient times, before big, giant, monotheistic, organized religions took over the world and said otherwise, death is not an end, and it is not a portal to some place where we get punished or rewarded. But it is many other things. And what I was saying was, I almost forgot. I remembered that a poem came to me in the moments before waking. And it's something, and I'm going to try to sort of spew it out now for the mental effort and practice of trying to see if I can remember it to then write it down, but also to share it with you as a real, an unscripted, of the moment thing going on in the podcast. What was... I came... a really cool title had come, too. And I now can't vaguely quite remember it. Death's... It was Death's Possessive... something. I can't remember. But I think it opened with, "Do not fear death, for it is a prerequisite to life. Neither should you taunt it, invite it, or unnecessarily welcome it in, for it will take you at your word. Do not fight it, oppose it, or try to run away from it. For death always wins at those games. Do not deny death, for it will teach you that lesson." That's not coming in quite clear. Something along those lines. And then it ended with something about, there was another couple of lines, about, "Do not try to be death." I don't remember how that stanza went. And then do not worship death. I think the worship death statement went something along the lines of, "Do not worship death, for it will make you one of its tools and steal life's joys from you." Something like that. And I think it ended, or wanted to end, because I don't think I quite finished it. I got sidetracked with wanting to move on with my day, and I was like, I gotta write this down. But I didn't have any of my devices set up and ready and charged to audio record it right then. But it's something I'm gonna get back to doing over the next couple of weeks during global shutdown. But this poem ended something along the lines of, simply acknowledge death and respect the role that it must play. Something like that. It's just all, the inspiration and the memory of the content is all kind of in tatters now, but there you go. At any rate, not to get all dark and stuff, there's a reason why in ancient times there were death cults. I do not want to get accused in any way, shape, or form of promoting the now probably terribly misunderstood and misrepresented idea of death cults in contemporary time. I am not that. I do, as a sort of amateur Zenist, as an amateur Buddhist, as a organized, non-religious, spiritual practitioner of direct phenomenological practice as opposed to ideological practice, I do believe that we need to redress, readdress, reorganize, reconfigure, rethink, and rediscover our mental, emotional, spiritual relationship to the phenomena of death. But that's a whole nother episode. What does it have to do with the opening question of this show? Well, I think it was a pondering thought late last night, right? That I didn't even know where it was going. And it probably, obviously, stimulated and influenced my thinking for this morning. But as it is time to wrap things up, I'll leave you with this, friends. If we stopped worrying about a future that we cannot predict, or maybe just also stopped trying to predict a future that we don't really know is coming, and also stopped obsessing about a future that may or may not necessarily be required of us, maybe we can get in line better with a relationship, get in line, develop a better relationship, establish some clarity of perception, achieve some deeper intuitive connection to our real relationship to the present moment and the emerging moment, that which is being revealed. Because again, if you set aside whatever contemporary, modern, theoretical, philosophical, scientific, spiritual, or religious definitions or models or mental models or ideological constructs of what time ought to be, and just deal with the phenomena as we genuinely, authentically experience it, then that might actually be healing. That might actually be helpful. That might actually get us on a better footing to deal with the world. And we can actually connect to those things in those ways I was just saying. We can actually maybe collectively change gears from a fear-based worrying and anticipating and fearing the future, trying to predict the future, trying to mitigate the future, trying to fight the future, trying to avoid the future, trying to change the future. Because fun fact, actually, now that I've said all that, I'm gonna land this landing and then we're gonna wrap it up. Right now, friends, right now, and every moment ever that you have lived through is the moment that in a sci-fi movie you would yourself travel back to from the future to fix what happened in the intervening quote-unquote past of your future self. Isn't it? Right? Or that some future generation would send someone, let's say, time travel doesn't get invented for another 200 years. Well, then that future generation would send people back right here and right now to fix whatever problems they're coping with. If we realign our thinking, realign our mental constructs, or maybe, just maybe, wacky idea here, practice the abdication. As I wrote recently to someone's posting in some spiritual group on one of the social media platforms that I'm on, they were talking about the path and how to cope with stuff that is negative, that feels like it no longer was serving them any good. And I think they were actually technically talking about cannabis, which I'm an enthusiast of, but also, as the ancient wisdom says, you don't keep carrying the raft once you've crossed the river, right? You tie the raft up at the shore of the river so that on your way back, you can cross the river back again. You don't dismantle the bridge, bundle it up and take it with you, right? Unless it's yours. Technically, you would do that if it was yours and you were taking it with you to cross unbridged chasms. So that falls apart there. But well, I mean, if you didn't build the bridge, if you found the bridge there, there would be no way for you to dismantle it safely and bring, I guess there could be. You could engineer some shit. But anyways, you get my point. I'll wrap it up with this. I humbly think that perhaps, just maybe, it might be worth doing those things. Abdicating our fear-based, especially the fear-based ideological constructs about the future and how it might end, and reconnect with the present moment, and reconnect with the actual unfolding moment. That ever-evolving boundary place where the fog seems to part a bit and thin away from us. Probably in fog, as a literal reasoning, why fog seems to dissipate around people as you travel through it. It's probably the body heat. Just throwing that out there. But, cinematically imagine that, right? Like, as you move forward through this scary, rickety bridge spanning a chasm whose bottom you cannot see, your understanding of the bridge and the conditions you might face as you travel across it improve, because as you traverse this blinding boundary, it sort of like unfolds away from you. Well, fog, kind of swirls away from you, but in reality, it's the other thing, it's the inverse, right? What's happening in our reality is that as we move forward, I posit to you as a theory, that the very fabric of reality is unfolding before us. And that, dear friends, to finally get to my point 41 minutes and 45 seconds later, is the real apocalypse. Not some horrible judgment from on high, but the very emergent unfolding of our own personal and community collective, species-wide collective probability waveform functions. Maybe, just maybe, heaven and hell are here and now. And the apocalypse is not some better place we're going to go to, or the defining moment in which we are cast down by some authoritative dictator god to some anally invasive, teeth-pulling, skin-peeling torture chamber, or some really tedious-sounding cloud lounge of harp music, but rather the pain and suffering, the challenges and conflict, the bliss and joy, the uplifting and forgiveness and healing that we experience here and now as the ever-happening apocalypse happens before us in the choices that we make and in the directions that we move our lives. I leave you to contemplate that, dear friends. And I hope that you find it interesting. I hope you found it worth listening to all 43 minutes and 25 seconds of this so far. And that may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. As always, thank you for tuning in. I humbly invite you to join the process, engage, not for my benefit, for the benefit of the show itself, so that the show can evolve and become a more interesting show. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, although I rarely check that, and of course, Gmail. And all my contact info is actually easily conveniently found on Sprecher.com. Just look for me, Mr. Zeppo. Peace out. Be good humans. May peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. And maybe, just maybe, as we move forward through these difficult, challenging times where the future outcome is uncertain, maybe if we all band together and change our dynamic, we can uplift and heal the whole species. Stay tuned for more episodes dropping soon. Global Shutdown Podcast Marathon continues shortly.